Welcome, dear listener, to this quiet moment, a space where the world outside can gently fade, and you can simply be. If you find yourself here, listening to these words, it often suggests a subtle seeking, a gentle stirring within. Perhaps it's a whisper of something deeper, an intuition that life, in its grand design, holds certain puzzles for us. This quest for understanding, this very act of inquiry, hints at a fundamental human condition, a sense that to be a human being is in some ways quite extraordinary, and at times a little problematic. There is, for many of us, a unique kind of life problem, which manifests in different expressions, yet at its heart, it often touches upon what is profoundly known in Buddhist traditions as dukkha. This ancient word, while commonly translated as suffering, might be more accurately understood as a pervasive chronic frustration, a subtle unease that hums beneath the surface of our daily lives. Tonight, as you settle in, letting the warmth of your surroundings envelop you, we will embark on a gentle journey together. Our purpose is not to solve these problems with urgency, but rather to softly illuminate their nature, to understand what this human problem truly entails, and in doing so, perhaps discover a path to a more profound sense of peace and belonging. We begin, as so many of us do, with a quiet puzzle, a riddle that resides not so much in our relationships with others, but deep within our own experience of ourselves. Have you ever noticed, in the ebb and flow of conversation, how often people express a desire to forget themselves? They speak of going to the movies, of losing themselves in the pages of a compelling novel, or becoming utterly absorbed in their work, all as ways to momentarily escape the constant companion that is their own self. It's a remarkably common sentiment. I want to get away from myself, and it's in those quiet moments, when the day's distractions recede, when we are left alone with ourselves in the silence, that this feeling can sometimes become most pronounced. Across cultures, both East and West, there's a tendency among many to feel a certain discomfort in such stillness. This observation is particularly poignant in modern societies, where constant noise, a perpetual stream of information, and an unrelenting need to keep the mind endlessly busy have become almost a way of life. We fill our spaces with sound, our screens with light, and our schedules with tasks, as if to ward off an invisible presence, the very essence of our own being. But what is it about this self, this I, that makes us so restless in its company? What is it about oneself that can feel so uncomfortable, so unsettling, that we constantly seek to avoid its direct gaze? The first, and perhaps most curious aspect, is that we don't truly know what it is. Yourself, the very core of your being, remains the most elusive subject to observe, for it is, quite simply, too close. Think for a moment. You cannot bite your own teeth. You cannot look directly into your own eyes without the aid of a reflective surface, a mirror. You are not in any apparent direct sense aware of your own brain as an object. For all these reasons, and many more, yourself is profoundly intimate, always remaining an unknown, a kind of blind spot at the very center of your experience. Consider this gentle thought. What color is your head to your own eyes? Most people, if they close their eyes and ponder this, form a vague impression that behind their eyes there exists a kind of blank. It's not truly black, nor is it definitively white. It's simply an absence, an unobserved space. You can turn your head, strain your senses, but you will never truly see it. What resides there, behind the eyes, at the perceived seat of consciousness? We simply don't know, not in the way we know the color of a flower or the texture of a stone. And yet, we hold strong ideas about it, don't we? The dominant idea woven into the fabric of our everyday language and thought is that there is something called I. When you use that word, I, what sensation does it evoke? To what specific experience do you refer? In what tangible way do you experience I as an existing entity? If we listen to how most people speak, they conceive of I, or myself, as a distinct center of awareness and action, often located intuitively somewhere in the head, perhaps halfway between the ears, a little behind the eyes. It's a focal point, a command center. Most people, however, don't fully identify this I with their entire body. We commonly say, I have a body, rather than asserting, I am a body. This subtle distinction in language reflects a deeper feeling that certain involuntary processes occurring within our physical form are not things for which I, this separate ego, am directly responsible. We don't say, I beat my heart, or I grow my hair. Instead, we experience the beating of the heart and the growing of the hair as phenomena that simply happen to us, as if to a vessel. Our bodies, then, often feel like vehicles, like cars given to us by our parents, into which, at some undefined point in our development, this ego, this I was deposited, a gentle spark, a sudden pop of awareness. When, precisely, did you begin to be you? There are many theories and fascinating discussions about this, but generally speaking, we tend to think of this I, or myself, as the source of our voluntary actions and our conscious attention, and therefore, everything that is experienced as existing outside this I, whether it's inside the physical body or more obviously, beyond the skin, is perceived as not I, as other, as something largely beyond our direct control, and in a profound way, even alien to us. The poet A.E. Housman captured this sentiment so perfectly when he wrote, I, a stranger and afraid in a world I never made. And here, dear listener, at this very juncture, often lies the quiet root of so many of our human problems. This seemingly solid center of our being appears not to be as permanent as we might wish. Indeed, it seems inextricably mixed with a body that ages, that grows achy and inconvenient, and that in time inevitably dissolves. What then becomes of this me? Perhaps the fear isn't so much of death itself, especially if one holds a belief in total extinction, a quiet cessation of consciousness. There is in that thought nothing truly to be afraid of, but the process of dying, the unraveling, the letting go that for many is the inconvenience, the difficulty. Why are we seemingly trapped in this fragile situation? I didn't ask to come here, we often say. In our popular speech, we declare, I came into this world experiencing this world as fundamentally distinct from ourselves. We speak of confronting reality out there, of needing to face facts that are always, of course, hard facts. No one, it seems, ever speaks of soft facts, though they abound in the gentler, more nuanced textures of existence. So this pervasive sensation, this quiet hum of feeling alienated from the vast universe, becomes a deeply ingrained part of our perspective. But if we pause and consider with a calm, open mind, it isn't truly accurate to say that you came into this world. No, you came out of it. Just as a leaf unfolds from a tree, a branch from a trunk, or a baby emerges from the womb, you are a natural symptom of the world, a unique expression of its ongoing process. In the same way that when a tree blossoms and produces apples, we call it an apple tree. A world that brings forth people is a world that peoples, an apple tree apples, and a human being humanizes. This sense, then, of being a stranger in this wondrous earth, this feeling of separation, is in essence a profound hallucination. And it is, furthermore, a rather dangerous hallucination. Why dangerous? because it subtly propels us to interact with the external world, both with other people and with the natural environment, in a spirit of subtle hostility. We speak, for instance, of the conquest of nature, as if it were an enemy to be subdued, rather than an intricate dance to be understood and participated in. This general feeling of resentment, of being unwillingly involved in a world that contains such inevitable realities as death, disease, accidents, strife, and war, leads us to feel put upon, as if life is something that is happening to us, rather than something we are deeply and intrinsically a part of. It is precisely to this fundamental problem that various forms of Asian philosophy, such as Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism, directly address themselves. Yet, their approach is distinct from what we typically understand as philosophy in the West, and often different from Western religion as well. If religion, in the Western context, evokes images of Judaism or Christianity, then Buddhism, for example, is not quite a religion in that sense. And if philosophy brings to mind the intricate speculations of thinkers like Kant or Hegel, or even modern philosophers such as Ayer and Reichenbach, then Eastern thought does not neatly fit that mold either. Perhaps the closest analogy to Eastern philosophy in the Western world is psychotherapy. The core objective of psychotherapy, at its heart, is to change the way in which people feel, to transform their inner experience. It is, in other words, a technique for subtly but profoundly altering one's state of consciousness. And in precisely this way, these ancient systems of thought, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism, are primarily profound methods for changing one's state of consciousness, for shifting perception at its very roots. Consider, for instance, a person who, in a state of delusion, feels that they are the target of an enormous persecutory plot. The psychotherapist's aim is to gently disabuse them of this illusion, to help them dissolve their fear and find a calmer, more grounded reality. So in a rather similar vein, let us softly entertain the idea that what we consider normal people might simply be sharing a collective form of subtle insanity. Because it is widespread and common, we mistake it for the ordinary, the natural way to be. It seems, does it not, increasingly clear that the world in many ways appears to be on a collision course, and therefore there is much to be said for the idea that the normal person's state of consciousness might greatly benefit from a gentle shift, a profound change, especially if this normal state is, as we are suggesting, fundamentally a hallucination, and even more so if the way we habitually feel our own existence stands in flat contradiction to how our existence would be described by a scientist, by a biologist, an ecologist, or a physicist. Ecology, for example, is a wonderfully important science, quietly revealing the intricate dance-like relationship between living organisms and their environments. Now, when an ecologist or a biologist closely examines a living organism, the very business of science is to describe what is happening, what is unfolding, and as they describe the living organism, they uncover a rather fascinating truth. They cannot accurately describe the organism, defined as something bounded by its skin or epidermis, without also, at the very same time, describing its environment. Science, in its essence, describes behavior, the ongoing process of what is going on. The scientist, peering through a microscope, offers this gentle wisdom. Instead of asking what it is, simply ask, what does it do? The behavior of an organism, you see, cannot be truly described without also describing the behavior of its environment. Imagine describing someone in the act of walking. If you say nothing about the floor, the ground, the room, or the space in which they are moving, all you are describing is a body in empty space, dangling its legs. That, in its essence, is not walking. To truly describe walking, you must, by necessity, describe the other behaviors or processes occurring around the organism. the floor providing resistance, the air supporting movement. What does this profound discovery tell us? It tells us that what we are truly speaking about is not the organism alone, as a separate entity, but something for which we have only the somewhat clumsy, yet wonderfully descriptive, term, the organism environment. Because, dear listener, that is what you truly are. Pause for a moment and consider, how could you possibly feel the existence of your own self, unless, at that very same moment, you also felt something other? How could you perceive any kind of figure, shape or form unless, simultaneously, you perceived its background? Imagine for a moment that the subtle outlines of your own body were to perfectly fill your entire field of vision. You wouldn't see your body. You would only notice the patterns on your clothes, the subtle textures. You can only truly recognize anything if it is perceived in relation to its background. This simple, yet profound observation gently reveals to us that figure and ground are utterly inseparable. They are different, yes, distinctly so. But the crucial idea, the one that can bring a deep sense of peace, is that things can be different yet inseparable. Think of the two poles of a magnet. They are distinctly different, a north and a south, but you cannot in reality have a one-pole magnet. They are inseparable. Or consider the two sides of a coin, a head and a tail. They are different, certainly, but they are utterly inseparable from the coin itself. And so the world is filled with these profound go-withs. I have even coined a simple word for this deep connection: go-with. There are certain things that always go with each other. The organism, for example, gently goes with its environment. And incidentally, though it may be harder for us to initially perceive, the environment also profoundly goes with the organism. I shall explain this more fully in due course, allowing the understanding to unfold like a quiet bloom. A go-withness is in essence a transaction. Consider, for example, the act of buying and selling. This is a transaction. It's obvious, isn't it, that you cannot truly buy something unless someone is, at the same moment, selling it. And equally, you cannot sell something unless someone is buying. These two operations are explicitly different. Buying is distinct from selling, yet they are fundamentally inseparable. They exist as two aspects of a single interwoven process. This suggests a certain kind of subtle conspiracy, a deep implicit unity between them. They are explicitly different operations, buying and selling, but implicitly they are one. In much the same way, you and everything you perceive as other are explicitly different. You are you, and the world is other. But since you always find these two aspects of experience, yourself and the world, together, in constant interplay, there is something deeply significant about this togetherness, something often overlooked, a subtle fishiness that has escaped our conscious attention, and that is this: they are implicitly one. But you see, in the ordinary course of our waking lives, as I've gently tried to explain, we are often not consciously aware of this profound unity. We tend to think that everything not self, everything that is other, is not merely different from us, but truly separate, and this deeply ingrained perception leads to that persistent sense of not truly belonging in this vast universe, of encountering nature as a series of challenges, as a problem to be solved. This feeling is further compounded by certain widespread ideas, what we might call the current superstitions of the modern world, the lingering mythology of 19th century science, which surprisingly has become the common sense of today. This mythology often posits that the world itself is, at its core, stupid, that it is a colossal system of electronic energy, buzzing and whirring mindlessly, within which we, as conscious beings, exist merely by virtue of some statistical fluke, a cosmic accident. You know the thought experiment. If 1,000,000 monkeys sat with 1,000,000 typewriters for 1,000,000 years, by sheer chance, they would eventually type out the entire Encyclopedia Britannica. The feeling among many is that what we are, at this very moment, is just such an improbable random event. And therefore the prevailing logic suggests that if we are to maintain human order, our cherished values, our reason, our civilization, we must actively fight against this fundamentally stupid world to preserve ourselves. In the philosophy of science from the 19th century, you frequently hear discussions of energy lying beneath matter, described as blind energy. Sigmund Freud, for instance, defined psychic energy as the unconscious, further labeling it libido, which at its root implies a kind of blind, unthinking lust. The unconscious, in this view, is seen as inherently stupid. It desires pleasure, but possesses no sense of reality. And so Freud would often contrast the pleasure principle with the reality principle, suggesting that civilization itself is perpetually at odds with pleasure. The unspoken fear is that if people are allowed to enjoy themselves too much, if they follow these stupid urges, society will simply unravel, fall apart. Because the pleasure principle, the very urge for joy, is by this definition fundamentally stupid. So you see, dear listener, we arrive at this pervasive sensation of living in an alien world, a world that we feel is inherently unintelligent, a world we must constantly strive against. All of this is further complicated by other intricate factors, which I will now gently unfold for you, allowing the understanding to settle like a soft dusk. The feeling of insularity, of being I alone and separate, is deeply intertwined with the way in which we direct our attention to life, and indeed with the very way in which we think about it. These two processes, attention and thought, are intimately connected, dancing together in the theater of our minds. Consider the task of any school teacher with young children. It is to patiently, gently increase their attention span, isn't it? Little children are often, though not always, perceived as flitting from one thing to another, their gaze wandering out the window, their hands exploring, their minds seemingly adrift. And so the teacher might gently tap on the desk saying, "Pay attention," and all the little children, knowing exactly what is expected of them, will often instinctively wrap their legs tightly around the chair, stare at the teacher with a slight frown, a look of strained concentration. This, they are taught, is paying attention. Yet in truth, this physical posture, this visible strain, has very little to do with genuine attention. It is merely an act, a conditioned response. What it deeply suggests, however, is that we have come to associate paying attention or concentration with a certain level of effort, a kind of mental strain, and actually, true concentration is quite the opposite. It is hindered, not helped by strain. But we persist in our habitual commands. Try to pay attention, try to think, try to understand what I'm saying. The truth is, you don't actually have to try in this strenuous way. Your magnificent brain, an intricate marvel of nature, will process and understand beautifully if you simply give it the chance. If you release the need for forceful effort, your brain is not a muscle that requires strenuous exertion to lift a heavy weight. While physical effort is needed for physical tasks, you don't have to strain to think a complicated thought. In fact, if you do exert effort, that very effort will often get in the way of the thinking itself, becoming a distraction, a kind of mental noise. But so ingrained is this idea that almost everyone believes that strenuous effort is precisely what is required. So this very sensation of I that we carry is, among other things, a chronic sense of mental strain, and it has even been observed to be physiologically located between the eyes. It has been found that if you consciously gently relax all sense of tension in that area, between your eyes, you will subtly but profoundly change your very sense of your own existence, your feeling of being. That is precisely where the habitual frown often resides, and it is therefore so very poignant and symbolic that Buddhas are often depicted with a luminous jewel, a radiant urna, precisely between their eyes, a quiet, powerful symbol of openness, of expansive illumination, of an effortless and boundless awareness. Now let's explore another aspect of how we pay attention, how we think. Don't we often say in our everyday speech that you can only think of one thing at a time? This common phrase raises two fascinating questions. First, why do we believe we can only think of one thing at a time? And second, what truly is a thing? If you were to ask a child, "What do you mean by a thing?" they might innocently reply, "An object which charmingly is another way of saying a thing and doesn't quite get us closer to a definition." Yet one very astute child once told me, with remarkable clarity, a thing is a noun. And she was, in her simple wisdom, profoundly correct. Because you see, to think and to thing, these are, in a very deep sense, the same process. You cannot truly think, not in our conventional sense of conscious thought, without employing words or numbers or some form of symbolic notation. You can think in words, constructing sentences and arguments in your mind. You can think in numbers, calculating and problem solving. And you can think in simple images, like squares, triangles or crosses, much like we interpret road signs that convey specific meanings. But at its essence, thinking, as we typically engage in it, is a process of calculus, a methodical bit-by-bit examination of the world, arranged in a series, one element after another, one discrete bit following another bit. It's as if we are trying to understand a dimly lit room with the aid of a narrow-beamed spotlight. We sweep the beam across the room, tracing out its contours, illuminating one small segment at a time. Then, in our memory, we piece together these individual bits, this series of illuminated fragments, to construct a coherent picture of what sort of room this is. Imagine, by contrast, a floodlight. With a floodlight, we perceive the entire room in a single instantaneous glance. We don't have to bit it to break it down into sequential fragments. And here's a subtle truth. With that floodlight of broader awareness, we actually perceive an enormous amount of information, a richness of detail, to which we often pay no conscious attention whatsoever. For example, if someone were to ask about a woman at a gathering, "Was Mrs. So-and-so there this morning?" I might reply, "Yes, she was indeed. She sat opposite me." But then, if asked, "What was she wearing?" I might honestly have no idea. I saw it, of course. My eyes registered the colors and shapes. But I didn't notice it. Why didn't I notice it? Because I wasn't specifically interested in that detail. I might have been captivated by her face, by the expression in her eyes, but her attire held no particular significance for me at that moment. Therefore, I formed no notation for it. It wasn't deemed noteworthy. So you see, when we employ notation, whether it be words, symbols, or numbers, what we are essentially doing is selecting. We are choosing to pay attention to those specific features of our environment that we have been taught to regard as significant, as important. And then, upon these chosen features, we affix a label. That label is a word, a symbol of some kind, or a number. In this systematic way, we effectively fragment the fluid, interconnected world into discrete units, which we then call things or events. Things are represented by noun labels, and events by verb labels. And through this process, we come to deeply imagine, to truly believe, that the world genuinely does consist of these separate, distinct things and events. But, and this is a profound and often difficult idea for people to truly grasp, it doesn't. The world in its deepest reality is not made up of separate things. The reason this idea is so challenging, you see, is that we have found this method of thinking about the world, this process of labeling and fragmenting, so incredibly useful. It's immensely helpful for predicting what will happen, for remembering what did happen, and indeed our ability to predict the future is fundamentally based on our memory of the past. This mental tool, this capacity for conceptual thought, has become so effective, so powerful, that it has in a way run away with us. And as a species we are quite seriously in danger of being completely fooled by the very processes of our own thinking. Allow me to offer some simple illustrations of this fascinating confusion. One of the primary symbols that all civilized people use every single day is money. Money is an extraordinarily convenient symbolism because it gracefully eliminates the necessity for physical barter. Imagine having to drive to the store with a truckload of eggs every time you needed to buy some new clothes. So we use money instead, a symbol of value, a token of exchange. But here's where the subtle deception can creep in. When you go to the supermarket and you fill your cart with a bounty of groceries, then roll it up to the cashier, and the machine goes tickety 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 tickety, and a long tape emerges, and she declares $30 please. Most people, most housewives, feel a slight pang of depression at parting with those $30. Yet, consider this, they have just acquired the real wealth in their cart. That is what they have truly gained. They've simply exchanged some pieces of paper or some digital numbers for edible goodies, for actual sustenance, for real value. Something, then, is subtly amiss in our perception. We are in fact currently witnessing major economic crises precisely because of a rather curious and deeply ingrained superstition involving something called gold. Gold, certainly, has its uses, for filling teeth, for crafting beautiful jewelry. But when hoarded in vast gleaming vaults and fortresses, it becomes utterly useless, doing absolutely nothing of practical value. But the superstition, you see, that gold is wealth, or that money is wealth, is a profound confusion of the symbol with the underlying reality. Take this confusion far enough, and people will begin to metaphorically, and sometimes literally, eat menus instead of dinners. And in a strange twist of reality, we are, in many ways, already doing precisely that. Take our everyday bread, for instance. The bread we commonly purchase in the ordinary grocery store is, in a profound sense, symbolic bread. It is, largely, nothing but squishy styrofoam, injected with allegedly nutritive chemicals, a conglomeration of plastic bubbles that perhaps once had some vague, distant connection with wheat. In its most extreme form, it can even be described as pure rat poison, its only real flaw being that it's neither large enough nor permanent enough to serve as a bolster. But this substance is being consumed everywhere, under the powerful superstition that this is food. It's symbolic food, an imitation of what Mama's real bread used to look and feel like, especially when it first emerged, warm and squishy, from the oven. Many people still unconsciously seek that nostalgic texture, but they have been profoundly fooled by the symbol. The same applies to our cars. The average modern car often looks as if it were a streamlined, thundering rocket. But it isn't. An engine designed for true streamlining would need to be streamlined underneath, as well as on top. What we often have instead is a sophisticated facade, a fake imitation of streamlining, simply plonked down with an open bottom on a chassis. Some luxury cars even feature fake rocket exhausts on their backs, with tiny vents, as if there were a roaring jet engine tucked away inside, like a capsule on an airplane. You see, the entire presentation is often a pose, a meticulously crafted fake. So you see, dear listener, what is happening to us in this quiet unfolding of modern life is that our extraordinary ability to think, to conceptualize, to symbolize, has in a way gone to our heads. We have become so adept at manipulating symbols that we sometimes forget the reality they represent. To truly come to our senses, to grasp the vibrant, pulsing reality of existence, we sometimes have to metaphorically go out of our minds. This isn't a new phenomenon. It has happened before in the grand meandering course of evolution. Consider a prehistoric animal known as the titanotheres, a distant ancestor of the rhinoceros. It possessed a nose horn, which was, of course, an incredibly useful weapon for defense and dominance. But this creature, driven by the evolutionary advantage of its horn, kept developing it, making it bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Eventually, the horn became so immense, so cumbersome, that the creature could no longer hold its head up. It became extinct, a victim of too much of a good thing. The dinosaurs, too, became excessively large. Their immense size was initially an advantage over other animals, but they overdid it, growing so vast that some species were hypothesized to have one brain in their head and another in their rump. One could humorously imagine a caveman with a pet dinosaur needing to bang a club on its tail at night so its distant rump brain would scream in time to wake him up in the morning. They too became extinct. In a similar vein, the human being, with our magnificent capacity for thought, risks becoming extinct through an overindulgence, an overemphasis on our head, on our thinking processes. We think too much in a way that separates us from the wiggly, fluid reality of the world. Now, when we think, as I've already pointed out, we equate some kind of symbol with what we then categorize as a separate event or thing in the world. The symbols themselves are distinct from each other, neatly categorized in our minds. But the things, the actual phenomena, are not truly separate. This world, dear listener, is a grand, wonderfully wiggly affair. Look at the clouds drifting across the sky. They are wiggly, ever-changing. The waters of a river, a lake, an ocean, they are profoundly wiggly, fluid, never still. The plants, the trees, the flowers, they are wiggly, organic, growing in intricate, non-linear forms. Even the mountains, seemingly so solid, have wiggly, undulating contours sculpted by eons. And people, ourselves included, are delightfully wiggly, full of curves, movements, and unpredictable expressions. Yet, humans, in our ingenious attempts to organize and understand, are always trying to straighten things out. Look around you in your immediate environment. We often live in rectangular boxes of all kinds, rooms, houses, buildings. Observe a bookshelf. Everything is neatly straightened out, arrayed in linear fashion. Wherever you look in nature and find things rigidly straightened out, perfectly aligned, you can almost always infer that people have been there at work. We are perpetually trying to fit things into boxes, to classify them, to create pigeonholes for understanding. Words, in this sense, are labels on these conceptual boxes. But the real world, the world beyond our labels, is gloriously, infinitely wiggly, wiggly, wiggly. Now, so then, dear listener, what happens in this profound confusion of symbol with reality is that eventually you confuse your idea of yourself with your actual self, your ego. What you typically mean by I in your everyday understanding is your conception of yourself. It is, as it were, the symbol, the mental representation for your actual living, breathing organism. And the one is simply not the other. They belong to entirely different orders of reality. The organism, this wondrous living form that you are, what I will for the moment call a physical reality, is of course a dynamic process. It is an energy system, constantly flowing, constantly transforming. It can do something. It acts, it perceives, it lives. But the ego, the I as a symbol, is precisely that, a symbol, It is not an energy system. It cannot, in and of itself, do anything, just as you cannot tie up a physical parcel with the equator. The equator is an imaginary line, a wonderfully useful concept for purposes of navigation and geography, but it must never be confused with a tangible physical reality. In just the same way the ego, this concept of I, that is given a name, John Doe, Alan Watts, Mary Smith, or whatever it happens to be, is fundamentally a concept. It's a method of tagging people, of categorizing and identifying, but it isn't in the deepest sense real, just as you cannot literally strangle someone with your telephone number, a series of digits on a page, though it does not deny the immense usefulness of a telephone number for communication. How then does this profound confusion arise in anyone's individual life? I have gently traced its arising from the perspective of civilization as a whole, pointing out how, when humanity developed symbolic systems, and these systems proved so incredibly effective, we began to subtly confuse the symbols with the underlying reality they represented. But now let's turn our attention to its emergence in one's personal life. You see, when you are a small child, a multitude of influences surround you, your parents, your teachers, your peers, the entire fabric of your society, all constantly engaged in the process of telling you who you are. It's profoundly important, in our social structures, to tag people, to label them. We often feel disconcerted, even uncomfortable, by a person who doesn't fit neatly into a category, who doesn't have a clear tag. If I can't determine whether you are a Republican or a Democrat, for example, there's a certain unease, a suspicion. Perhaps you must be a communist. We feel a sense of safety when we can confidently label someone, for then we feel we know what they will think about almost anything. You can often predict, with surprising accuracy, what someone will think about a given subject if they identify strongly with a particular ideology or group. This predictability, however, can be a subtle indicator of a certain lack of spontaneous intelligence, of an inability to adapt to truly surprising situations. Such a person might not know what to do when faced with something genuinely novel, something not in the book, or not aligned with the party line. But we as humans often prefer to have people safely labeled in this way. And so this phenomenon extends beyond political differences to encompass religious affiliations, and even to the very types of character we expect from people. We have read novels for so long that we have come to believe, almost unconsciously, that characters should be consistent, always acting in predictable ways. A trope that only the most modern anti-novels dare to challenge. But real people, in the fluid dance of life, are not consistent at all. Yet, they are supposed to be, and they may even feel a deep sense of guilt if they are not. So what you learn to do throughout your education and socialization is to skillfully act a social role that is deemed acceptable. You have several to choose from, depending on your culture and context. For men, for instance, you might adopt the persona of the strong, silent type, or the intellectual, studious type, perhaps the clown type, or even the standard drunk in some narratives. There are indeed all sorts of more or less predictable roles that you can act in life, and that, if performed convincingly, will often allow you to get away with it, to navigate society successfully. Consider a childhood memory. One day, as a young child, you met another child whom you deeply admired. You came home, perhaps unconsciously, imitating that child's mannerisms, their way of speaking, their gestures. Your mother, in her concern, might have been bugged by this imitation, because she suddenly didn't recognize you. She might have said, "Johnny, that's not you, that's Peter," and made you feel a subtle sense of guilt about it. But then, you see, a profound process of social conditioning begins. The message, subtly yet powerfully, is delivered. Now you, Johnny, are a person, a real person. At least you've got to try to be. And what does this real person entail? It means that you are a free agent. You are responsible for your actions. You can be praised for the good things you do and blamed for the bad things. You are independent. You are free. You are separate. Now, the inherent difficulty for a small child, especially, is that they possess no means of criticizing or questioning this relentless flow of information. Social pressure is, for a child, almost irresistible. Everyone tells young Johnny that he is a free agent, and so he believes he is. And why does he believe it? Because, quite paradoxically, he cannot help it. He is, in a profound sense, compelled to be free. Then the conditioning deepens further. He is told, "Now we want free conduct from you. We want you to love us." Not, of course, because we tell you to, but because you really want to. In other words, you are required to behave in a way that will be considered acceptable only if you do it voluntarily. No wonder, dear listener, that so many of us feel mixed up, confused, even subtly fractured within ourselves, because we spend the rest of our lives, often unconsciously, trying to resolve that profound paradox. And there, you see, lies the very root of the matter, this deeply ingrained confusion between our symbolic personality, our ego, our mask on the one hand, and our living, breathing, profoundly integrated organism on the other. And it is the living organism that is, in its essence, truly real. We need to take a closer, more gentle look at that too. What sort of reality is this organism? Well, it's not what we often habitually think it is. It isn't a solid, fixed thing. It is rather a dynamic, ceaseless process. It would be far better described by a verb than by a noun. A body is not merely a body. It is a body. It is an ongoing act, a continuous unfolding. Think of a whirlpool in a flowing stream. You can return to the same place every day and observe that the whirlpool is consistently there, maintaining its shape, its dynamic form, yet no single drop of water ever stays within it. The whirlpool is not a thing composed of static water. It is a behavior, a vibrant, ephemeral dance of water. And you recognize it, day after day, not because it's the same water, but because it's the same dance, the same intricate pattern unfolding. You recognize a person, day after day, because they are performing the same sort of dance, or rather they are the same sort of dance. You don't need a separate it that does the dance, any more than when you say it is raining. There is some mysterious it that is doing the raining. The raining is raining. So, dear listener, each one of us is a dancing, flowing pattern in a vast, energetic stream, a stream of vegetables, beefsteak, milk, water, air, cosmic rays, heaven only knows what else. You are a unique, intricate kind of jazz, an improvisation of the universe, and if you were truly aware of that, if you came to profoundly realize that your organism, this living, breathing process, is you, then you would make another startling and deeply peaceful discovery, one that your organism, in its deepest wisdom, knows all the time, that it is one seamless process with the rest of the world. Just as the waves of the sea, you cannot truly isolate a single wave, can you? There is simply waving, a continuous undulation, and just as the sea is waving and the world is peopling, so too are you, a magnificent wave of the world's energy, a unique expression of the universe saying, "Look at me, I'm here. See what a funny, delightful thing I'm doing today," declares the universe, through each and every one of you. And so, if in other words the organism, in its very bones, in its deepest being, knows all this, but you don't know it with your conscious attention, because you cannot directly look at yourself, and you are confused with your ego, which is to say your social role, your person, then this underlying wisdom remains obscured. The very word person, you see, holds a fascinating clue. It comes from the Latin word persona, which literally means mask. In ancient Greco-Roman drama, actors wore megaphonic masks, but through which the sound comes to project their voices and embody their characters. So the word person, coming to mean what it does, suggests that when we describe someone as a real person, it might ironically imply a kind of genuine fake, like some carefully crafted antiques. It is then, as a profound result of this fragmented, broken-up, bitty way of thinking about the world, that we often feel disconnected, cut off, isolated. And because we cannot directly see or experience the self as an objective entity out there, we project all sorts of superstitions onto it. It's much like how people think about death. You cannot truly imagine death, not in a direct experiential sense. And so into this perceived void, one projects all sorts of fears and anxieties. People are afraid of death. They think, oh, what's it going to be like to go to sleep and never wake up? They imagine themselves being shut up in the dark forever, and it bugs them. It frightens them. But on the other hand, when you gently start thinking about what it might be like to go to sleep and never wake up, it suddenly, quite humorously, occurs to you that when you were born, you woke up without ever having gone to sleep. It's a rather curious thought, isn't it? And of course, if it happened once, it can certainly happen again. And that gentle realization begins to truly puzzle you about what you mean by you. Everyone, dear listener, feels that they are I. Everyone has this fundamental sensation of being in the middle of everything. You turn around and perceive more or less equally in all directions, and you feel that you are the center, the focal point of your universe. Everyone feels this centrality just as profoundly as I do, or you do. In fact, even insects, I'm quite sure, feel they are in the center, and I'm certain they feel they are people in their own way. We of course don't often bother to notice them in great detail, and therefore they all tend to look the same to us. And so we conclude, well, they're not people, they're all alike. They're some sort of mechanisms, but they in turn look at us in precisely the same way. They can't make any sense of what we're doing, and so to them we are likely just some sort of funny, inexplicable mechanisms moving around. So there is indeed a great deal of mystery hidden within this self that we carry. And of course, we are often worried about it. We observe that the organism, this living form, eventually vanishes. We are constantly defending our personalities. Someone might accuse our personality of falling apart, saying, now you're not being consistent, you're not fulfilling what you said you would do, you're not playing the role you're supposed to play. Everyone at some point feels that they are coming apart because they are not acting right, as if on a stage. So we are constantly on the defensive, and we are also a prey to anxiety. Anxiety in its deepest sense is a trembling motion, a wavering, to be or not to be. That is the question. Because the very minute you know you're alive, the moment you truly become aware of being alive, you simultaneously realize that you might also be dead, for to be implies not to be. And not to be, although we don't often consciously dwell on it, implies the potential for to be. So we are perpetually wondering, now, if I do this, will I survive, or would I be better off doing that? We are never quite sure. We feel that when we face a truly important decision, we must make it perfectly, weighing every possible factor. We wonder, did I take everything into consideration? Did I make a sensible judgment? But in truth, we never really know for certain, because even in the most meticulously thought-out plan, unforeseen, chancy things inevitably occur. You don't know whether you're going to slip on a banana peel or suddenly fall ill. Life is, in so many ways, wonderfully unpredictable. Therefore we tremble. Shall I do this? Shall I do that? Now, when it occurs to us, though it usually doesn't in our ordinary way of thinking, that there is, in a profound sense, no fundamental choice between to be and not to be, it can bring a deep calm, just as there is no ultimate choice between front and back. Space implies solid just as much as solid implies space, but our conscious attention, in its focused way, often ignores this profound interconnectedness. It suffers in a way from ignorance. We notice the figure, the foreground, and habitually ignore the background. We notice the solid objects, and often disregard the space around them. We focus on the relatively moving, smaller object, but we tend to ignore the relatively stationary, vast background. That is the nature of consciousness, of conscious noticing. And so you see, we often fail to notice that, in order for something to be present to be, it must also implicitly be absent to not be, because life itself is an energy system, and energy in its very essence vibrates, and whatever vibrates, whatever truly is, goes on and off. If I sit next to someone in a movie theater, and they attract my attention, and I place my hand on their knee, and simply leave it there steadily, they will, in due course, cease to notice it, because it becomes a constant, unchanging stimulus. But if I gently stroke their knee, or pat it softly going on and off, they will continue to notice it, because it is the rhythm, the pulsation, the alternation of presence and absence that makes it perceived. Now all energy systems, in their fundamental nature, go on and off. You cannot truly know you are on unless you are also implicitly off. So we have the fundamental rhythm of waking and sleeping. We experience every kind of rhythm in the universe, and there are tiny, incredibly fast rhythms that go dig, 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 dig so rapidly, like a beam of light, that your conscious mind doesn't perceive the spaces, the offs, because your retina simply doesn't react quickly enough. It registers the stimulus of the on, but before it can truly register the off, a new on arrives. So you perceive what appears to be a constant stimulus. A table, for instance, appears to be hard and solid, but it is vibrating at such an incredibly fast rate that you cannot simply put your finger through it. In the same way, an airplane propeller or an electric fan appears to be a solid disk when spinning rapidly, but it is in reality all going on and off. There are these very fast vibrations of on and off, and there are also very slow ones like the grand rhythm of life and death. Now you see it, now you don't. That in its essence is what the world truly is, a continuous dance of presence and absence, of appearance and disappearance. But because of the focusing nature of our conscious attention, which tends to regard on as real and off as unreal, because we ignore it, which regards solid as real and space as unreal, we miss this profound truth. It's like trying to conceive of waves as merely a series of crests without any troughs. But a wave in its entirety is a crest trough, an on-off pulsation. So off is just as important, just as essential, as on. You cannot have anything truly happening without both. And although they are explicitly different, on and off, they are implicitly one. We call it energy. So, dear listener, if these neglected and often ignored features of the world were to gently come to our attention, if they could, in some subtle way, impinge upon our consciousness, we would undoubtedly feel very differently than we ordinarily do. How, then, would you feel? Well, I can roughly describe it to you, though the actual experience is a profound and very odd feeling indeed at first. You would begin to feel that what you are doing and what happens to you are in a deeper sense the very same process. You could perhaps say of everything that happens to you, I am doing it. And equally, of everything that you are doing, you could say, it is happening to me. Consider, for example, when you are steering a car, are you pulling the wheel? or are you pushing it? In reality, it's a push-pull, isn't it? Both. Although the words push and pull are formally logically opposed to each other, that is precisely what you are doing when you are steering. You are push-pulling. So, in exactly the same way when you are acting, what your environment does and what you do are in their deepest essence the same continuous process. So when you truly feel that, when that realization settles into your being, it is indeed a very odd, yet profoundly liberating sensation. You might feel, as you walk up a hill, that the hill itself is subtly lifting you, participating in your ascent. Now it's true that a lot of people, encountering this profound sense of unity, might, in their initial excitement, misunderstand it. They might suddenly exclaim, "Well, I'm God. I'm doing everything." And if they begin to tell everyone that they are personally in charge of the entire universe, and therefore demand to be bowed down to and given divine honors, people would, quite naturally, object and say, "Well, that's absolutely preposterous. You must be mad." Or a person might take the entirely opposite point of view and declare, "I do nothing. I'm just a little puppet on the end of strings, and everything I do is controlled by something else." In other words, they might become a complete fatalist, surrendering all sense of agency. What such a person often fails to see is that, in a deeper, more integrated sense, both points of view are in their own way right. But of course this profound understanding won't fit neatly into an idea of God that is based on the ancient monarchies of the Near East. That is to say, it won't comfortably align with an idea of God conceived as the cosmic boss, the ultimate chief. That's a political image, and it simply doesn't work too well for the profound mystery of the Godhead. It leads, as we have seen throughout history, to all sorts of trouble, to divisions and conflicts. As I often humorously point out to my American friends, you believe, don't you, as American citizens, that a republic, a democracy, is the best form of government. How then can you truly reconcile that with thinking of heaven as a monarchy? If heaven is a monarchy, then by implication, monarchy is the best form of government. What about democracy in the kingdom of heaven? How does that fit now? So perhaps we have to conceive of God in accordance with some fundamentally different kind of image. Or, wait a moment, perhaps we shouldn't do that at all. Images of God in many spiritual traditions are considered idolatry, aren't they? There are no true images. For every image, every concept is an idol, and idols that are made of imagination and thought are in many ways far more dangerous than idols crafted from wood or stone. Nobody truly takes a wooden idol entirely seriously. You merely regard it as a potent symbol. It's such an obvious symbol, but a concept, especially one that seems so spiritual, so abstract, so ethereal, that is the most dangerous kind of idol, as we shall see when we explore the quiet wisdom of Buddhism, which seeks to gently dissolve all these conceptual idols. So then, dear listener, if we were to gently wake up, to become truly disillusioned, not in a negative sense, but in the sense of being unillusioned, disenchanted, or unspellbound. You know, we spell words, and it is often words that subtly spellbind us. We hypnotize people by talking to them, by weaving narratives with language. So if we could gently free ourselves from the beguilement, the enchantment of words and fixed concepts, we should wake up to find ourselves in this very different, profoundly liberated situation. A situation where you would deeply know that you and the universe are, in truth, the very same continuous process. You as an organism are an intricate, beautiful operation of the universe itself. The real you, the profound you, is the whole thing, the entire cosmic dance. That is why in that somewhat fumbling proto-science we call astrology, when ancient practitioners sought to draw a picture of a person's soul, they drew in their crude yet insightful way a picture of the universe itself, your unique horoscope, because your soul, your true essence, isn't something contained in your body, rather your body is profoundly in your soul. And your soul is the entire intricate arrangement of forces, the vast cosmic pattern that constitutes this universe, all centered on your unique physical organism, on this living wave that you are. That's why the astrologer would meticulously take the time and place of a person's birth and ask, how are the heavens, the entire cosmic tapestry, arranged around that precise moment? That is why your soul is in heaven. It is the total arrangement of cosmic forces, the magnificent overarching pattern. And when you truly wake up to that, when you actually feel it to be so, when this deep understanding settles into your very being, I assure you, it is simply magnificent. You stop worrying about deep central anxieties. You will, of course, remain sensible enough not to deliberately walk into a fire, but that pervasive existential trembling, that deep central anxiety, gently dissolves. Because you see, it's like the universe itself has nothing to fall onto if it were to drop. A fall, after all, is only truly disastrous if there's a hard floor of concrete far down below. But the universe, in its boundless expanse, has nothing to fall onto. Everything within it is perpetually dropping in its own way. The Earth is dropping around the Sun, the solar system around the galaxy. Just so long as there isn't another planet directly in the way, or some catastrophic collision, nothing truly bad happens in this continuous cosmic descent. And the system as a whole, the universe itself, there isn't anything else beyond it. So why worry? Besides, if you, as an organism, eventually disappear, if this particular wave of the universe recedes, that is also in its own way magnificent, because if you went on for too long eternally, you might eventually grow tired of yourself, of this particular pattern, and so there is always a new surprise in store, a fresh unfolding, a new dance. The universe, in its profound wisdom, is a self-surprising system. That is why it continues. That is why it endlessly creates. When you know the future perfectly, when every outcome is certain, it is in a profound sense already past. You've had it. When you know the outcome of a game, and it becomes absolutely certain, you simply cancel it and begin another fresh one. To know too much, to be completely certain, is to lose the thrilling, vibrant mystery of life's ongoing dance. So let these gentle thoughts, these quiet reflections, softly guide you now. Allow the idea that you are not separate, not a stranger, but a fundamental, wiggly, wonderful expression of the universe itself to settle deep within you. There is no need for strenuous effort, no need for frantic thinking. Just as your breath flows effortlessly in and out, so too can your mind drift into a